Great to have you here. Oh, what a full room upstairs. Wonderful. Welcome, folks upstairs. Glad to have you here. The Oxbow must be important for some of you, many of you. How many people, raise your hands, have been to the Oxbow? So many people. I asked upstairs, very similar reaction. How many people had visited the Oxbow back this far, the 1990s? 1980s? 1970s? 1960s? 1950s? 1950s? Dare I go to the 40s? Well, that's pretty cool. For those of you that may not be specifically aware, the Oxbow on the Erie Canal is located between the canal bridge where Perinton Park is, where West Church Street turns into Fairport Road. It's between that area and where Erie Road Bridge is. It's about midway between. And it backs up to Minerva DeLand School, the football field, the former high school. How many people went to Minerva DeLand High School? Very good. A heavy population over here. The football field somewhere around mid...
I went there when it was junior high.
Of course, just to qualify that. So to translate that, you're not quite as old as that. A great way to get to it is to park at Minerva DeLand School, preferably when class isn't in session, because these days the security guards will chase you, and go down to about midfield, and there's a little path that'll lead you right there. Or you can get to it from the neighborhood off Hulbert, which is called Old Orchard, and a little driveway that leads back there. So anyway, wonderful place. Here's what it looks like today. And I'll show you some other images, maps, and a lot of great images, and tell you some stories too. First of all, I have some folks I'd like to thank. Some people that provided help, inspiration, photographs. Bonnie King, Bob Ruland, that's Mr. Perinton, Joanne Hayford, Steve Shalaba, Joyce Rumpf, a woman I've never met, but you'll see her photography. Debbie Wyman, Nancy Slayball from the Perinton Historical Society, Dave Weiner, who is doing the video that simulcasts upstairs and will be on YouTube, Scott Diamond, who does wonderful communications for the town of Perinton. Scott, thank you for being here. And Gene Whitney, who has been an inspiration to me for 15 years at least. So I wanted to touch on that. So this Oxbow, fundamentally, now, this way is Erie Road Bridge. That way is that Fairport Road Bridge. And this is really the most significant remaining path of the original Erie Canal from 1822, right here. And there was a time when the canal was widened and deepened several times, but one specific time that we'll talk about, when this area was created bypassing this. But this shape is what causes it to be referred to as an Oxbow, even before this bypass occurred. So, everybody know where we are?
Yes.
The Minerva DeLand football field will be right back over here. For many, many years, the Oxbow was home to many people. As many as 65 small cottages and homes at its peak. Imagine waterfront homes. Lots and lots of people, sometimes in the water. They would tell you they were not squatters. In fact, everyone that I've ever talked to that had personal experience said they really hated that name. The people that owned the little cottages and homes paid taxes on the structure. They're on state land, so they had a limited amount of flexibility in terms of being there forever. In fact, the state wound up pulling the trigger to no longer have residents there. But they did pay school taxes, town taxes, and they did their part in that regard, and didn't always get the services that just about everyone else got. We'll talk more about that. Not squatters. Here's that Oxbow. Now, what if that bypass that was up here had never been created? Just to give you a feel for what it would look like today with that same aerial image. What if this wasn't here? I did that with a little digital fun that I had with a couple glasses of wine. But imagine, there would be one fatal flaw as to why this wouldn't work today. One of the big reasons why they kept enlarging and deepening the canal was to accommodate bigger and bigger vessels. The early canal was full of bends and twists and turns when it was first dug, all across New York State, because they dug it with hand tools and animals and no machinery to speak of. And so it was a process of finding the path of least resistance. So if they had to go around an obstacle, for instance, in this area, it just might have been that the altitude was a little bit higher up here versus going around. I don't really know the answer, but that's one scenario. So the original path, and this is what it would look like today. Look, I even put an itty bitty little towpath in there. You can get really carried away. You're probably familiar with the 1885 bird's eye view, although you may have never seen it in color.
No.
For this, I consumed many bottles of wine. I did hand digitize, colorize this, pixel by pixel by pixel. Normally, it's like a sepia tone. Isn't it beautiful? Yes. And my hope is that sometime, somebody, somewhere, will find a place, and I will provide this to them to put it up in a municipal building, or even as a mural, a projected mural, something like that, because I think the color is kind of fun. The reason I show it to you is because the Oxbow is up here. Now this is 1885, and you can see clear as day up there, there's the Oxbow. So there's a long, long history, but when I started studying this, I did not know how long, specifically, how long it took for the old curved route to be modified with a straight path straight across, which came with problems when they did it. This is the 1822 map, the first map of Monroe County. Monroe County was created in 1821, just before this. We used to be part of Ontario County, which was massive, all the way from the Genesee River east, and all of what Ontario is today, Ontario County. So here's Perinton over here. Here is the canal. Now this is the same year the canal opened. We opened in April of 1822. So here it is from the Wayne County line, and we work our way over, and here is represented the Oxbow. Not a very dramatic bend in these maps, in this particular map. Pittsburgh, look, that's a significant Oxbow all the way around the village of Pittsburgh. By the way, sometimes people get caught up on these dark spots, which kids have told me they think are probably topographical features or something. I think it's probably someone with chewing tobacco or grape juice leaning over the map. So, great feature for us to see from the beginning. Look, this is so early that Fairport isn't even on the map yet. Fulham Town, Hartwell's Basin, which was quickly after named what? Yeah, Bushnell's Basin. September 1854. Now I am on a search to find out when was the canal undergoing its great enlargement and how did that impact the Oxbow that we came to know. I found this from September of 1854. The Canal Board is to meet on Thursday, the 28th instant. The 28th is right around the bend, to locate the line of the enlarged canal between Brighton and Macedon. It was decided by a former board under the law of 1851, but the question is to be reopened. So they're saying in 1854, we need to nail down this route, what it's going to be when we modify it. If they're saying it in September of 1854, that means it hasn't happened yet, right? So we know it hasn't been enlarged yet. This is a very complicated structure, a map that took me ages to make. There's something called the Holmes and Hutchinson map. Holmes-Hutchinson, that's one name, Mr. Holmes-Hutchinson. For the longest time, I thought it was two folks. It wasn't. He drew, with the help of others, they surveyed and drew maps all the way across New York State in preparation for this great enlargement of the canal, the second generation of the canal. In some communities, the canal deviated greatly from its original path. Not so much in ours. These are individual pages of the map all the way across Perinton that I cobbled together so we can get a feel for the whole area. So this is the village of Fairport, and right off the bat we can see, gee, in this original 1834 map, there's a notch in the canal. Today it goes across straight. You can see that as a deviation today of what was there way back. These are two close-up maps of what I just showed you, the Holmes-Hutchinson map. This is Fulham's Basin, so Perinton Park would be right here. Fairport Road turning into West Church Street. There's a reason it's called Fulham's Basin. Look at the basin in 1834. Part of it was just to be able to have a place to turn around boats. Part of it is launching boats, getting them out, repairing them. And then this is Bushnell's Basin. So we're working with these maps, trying to understand what we have in terms of points in time and what was happening with the canal, what it looked like, how it changed. Now I relied on a historian. I'm going to get out here so I can read it for a moment. A previous historian from way back when, and she didn't sign her work. I say she because they were all she before me. For better or worse. By 1836, when the canal was enlarged for the first time, builders had learned a few things. This time, the route from Fulham's Basin to Fairport Road was straight. Goes on talking about that. But the point is, there was a great question about when it was enlarged. This says it was 1836. It turns out it was not. Here is the Holmes-Hutchinson map showing the Oxbow. No line across here cutting off the pass, right? No straightening here. 1834. Unfortunately, I don't have a date on this map. It came to me without a date, but it shows the Oxbow, and now it shows that route that cuts across to the west. But it does give some clues. There's three names. Richard Reed, property owner here. Hulbert, Mr. Hulbert. Louis Hulbert, right there on the west side of what would become the bank of the canal, and Hallett. H is cut off, but it's Hallett, just off the edge of the map. Ooh, that was a big find when we figured that out. Because this is Anne Slade Hallett, better known as English Annie. Fascinating human being who was occasionally rich, occasionally poor, huge property owner that kept accumulating land for her farm, getting more and more mortgages, and sometimes more and more in debt. But she must have been a powerful, fascinating woman. She was doing much of this on her own. She had children, but they weren't much help. She had a husband who was out of the picture pretty soon. And here she was making it happen on her own. This is one of her daughters, Mary Hallett Austin. And English Annie helps us understand the story of when the canal was enlarged in our area. Her daughter, Mary Hallett, found this newspaper article at her death, 1925. And the headline says she rode an ox team clearing the Oxbow. It talks about her family came from England, English Annie, and first they lived in Henrietta briefly, but then they moved to the Fairport Perinton area. And when she was just a little girl, she was helping her daddy on the ox cart along the canal. And she was helping farm that land with her dad when she was just a little kid. And we can find out where she lived. To this country from Somerset, England with her parents. And it goes on to tell that story. Place known as the Oxbow when it was nothing but woods. Kind of like that digital image that I created. Nothing but woods there. Imagine that that was a forest all around that bow. So she had that experience as a young girl. There's a woman named Joanne Hayford who has been coming to visit me for years and teaching me about local history. English Annie is her perhaps great-great-great-grandmother. And one thing, when you have 8 or 10 kids, there can still be a lot of descendants around in the area. So Joanne was able to find some documents related to the property of Anne Hallett, and specifically related to her claim against New York State for taking some of her land to create that path to avoid the bend. And that's what this document is. Ann Hallett, State of New York, a claim for lands belonging to claimant appropriated in the construction of the enlarged Erie Canal. Appropriation was made in the spring of 1855. So New York State got that land in 1855 and then quickly proceeded. So I believe probably 1856 was when it was widened in our area. Oh, by the way, this map shows the name Hallett, and this map is from the 1850s. It shows different property owners, and it shows Hallett right here. And if you look at this bend right here, some folks live on Old Post. Old Post is right here. The cul-de-sac is right here. So that's where we are. Ann Hallett owned that land. Here's a comparison of that area back on the Holmes-Hutchinson map. We're talking about right there. And there it is. So for a history geek like me, this was big news because we were able to nail down when that happened. Every time that they changed the route of the canal and deviate its path, it often resulted in having to create a embankment. You've heard of the Great Embankment in Bushnell's Basin? Well, there were other embankments too. Here's one of them. This is the Oxbow over here, no water in it. It's in the off-season. This is 1918, before they filled it with water. And this is the bank, 1918. So this is decades and decades and decades old. But in the off-season, they would fortify it. That's why they brought in this small gauge railroad line in order to bring in materials, soil, stone, to fortify this bank. But look at how built up it is. They had to build it up because the lay of the land in itself was too low to relocate the canal.
Jefferson Road is to your right.
Jefferson Road is over here. That's a good point, because we're going to get to that, because that plays a point here. So when you walk down the canal path sometime, if you walk along, and you'll see this a lot between Fairport Road and Erie Road, and even further south as you're heading towards Bushnell's Basin, if on one side of the canal, the lay of the land is fairly level with the canal, but on the other side, there's quite a drop-off, that means that most likely the canal was relocated to that spot where the drop-off is during the Great Enlargement period, long, long ago. Does that make sense? Look at those hills back here. You see these hills in tons of pictures. This one's Old Hogback. You know where Selborne Chase is? You know where Hickory Ridge neighborhood is? That's where we are, up there, off in the distance. Here's a view looking from the Fairport Road Bridge, where Perinton Park is, looking south, and we can see, now this is from 1919, so the Oxbow will be right up around the bend here. You can just make it out, and this is springtime labor taking place to clear a path for the canal. Maybe there's some debris or junk or some fill has come in there that they have to get rid of. So that's what they're doing. And even way back in 1919, you see these power line towers? These old iron towers, can you see those? I mean, you're way, aren't you? Historic artifacts are all around us. This tower right here is right there. It's still there. It was old in 1919. We are looking at what was for a while called Oxbow Lake. And this is the route to Fairport. So here is where the embankment was built. That way's Jefferson Avenue. This photograph is from 1915. Now at that time, people were very concerned because New York State, with the barge canal project, which was already kind of finishing up in the Fairport Perinton area, but they were concerned that New York State was going to fill all of this in. And people didn't want that. The Oxbow had already become a wonderful place for recreation and enjoyment. We'll talk more about that. Once New York State committed to not filling it, due to a lot of pressure from local people, people started to flock to the Oxbow, and it really started to grow. But you can see, even in 1915, quite a few residences, little cottages, many of which started out as boathouses. Now we're going to jump back in time. 1864, canal breaks. The breaking of the canal, catastrophic failure. are a story often where these banks exist, include these embankments. Very much so in Bushnell's Basin, but also that tall bank that I showed you right across from the Oxbow. 1864, they wrote about this in newspapers in Scotland. Like from here to there. The Rochester Union, a very serious breach of the Erie Canal yesterday afternoon at what is known as Oxbow Bend in the town of Perinton, 12 miles east of Rochester. And they write about that, and they attributed the break to this little animal, a muskrat. This is the first one I've heard of where the muskrat was blamed for burrowing. Burrowing, because that's what, you look it up on the internet and it says that's what they do. They burrow in canal banks. I guess if there's no canal, they don't live there. Every break since then, they blamed it on a muskrat. A lady wisely said to me once, how do they know that it was a muskrat? Did anyone see a muskrat burrowing? I'm not going to put the finger on the muskrat. 1871, just 7 years later, at the Oxbow, the Great Canal Break. Interruption, serious interruption of navigation. A canal boat, so that bank busted away, probably the muskrat. Water rushes through the break, all the way down towards Jefferson Avenue. It took a boat and the horses and mules that were pulling it, and the stories say those animals were dangling from an oak tree. No one was hurt miraculously. But this break was a big deal. And in the Democrat and Chronicle of 1871, they wrote, this locality has always been looked upon with fear and trembling by canal men generally and by boatmen in particular. Got to sell those newspapers. So in that break, some interesting history happened. So the break was over here, right about over here. Over here we have this bank. There weren't any of these houses. There were maybe a couple of boathouses back there. And the news, in Rochester newspapers, but again, all over the country, the news of the break was sent all over in the state. And the idle, the indigent, and the depraved made their way to the scene of the disaster and applied for work, which was readily given. Oh good, we were looking for some depraved people. The men began to exhibit a spirit of indifference that rapidly ripened into open refusal to work. A large number left their places and walked away. Others continued to labor. We've got labor trouble. Then commenced an attack on those who were of a peaceful disposition by the rioters, which was carried so far as to stone the men and throw the loaded and unloaded wagons into the ditch. Gradually, all work was suspended. Those disposed to be rebellious, frightened, or intimidated the others. They dropped their work. They stopped. All work stopped. This caused the New York State militia to be called to the scene. And they came in big numbers. That's the story that we handed out. That newspaper article there's many, but that's a good one. And the militia came, and where else would you set up camp? Right on that elevated point, overlooking all that chaos. One person wrote, this morning I saw the strikers rise from their barracks in the big tent. They sleep with their shovels and picks in order to save them from being stolen, as the custom is. Imagine sleeping with a shovel. They gaze with astonishment at the new tents of the soldiers and at the array of militia drawn up before them. Tanks were positioned on the rise across the canal. They arrested a few people, kind of made a big show out of doing the perp walk down to the village hall in Fairport, which didn't exist yet, but we did have a jail. I show you this map because, let's see now, the Oxbow would be down here. Here's Fairport Road. But there's stories in the newspaper about the rioters watching as militia poured across the bridge here. This is a bridge we've never even seen before. This is the Fairport Road Bridge. There used to be a bridge just next to the Oxbow, just before the edge of it. Imagine, there's history yet to be found. So, the home of Richard Reed, right up here, it was all his property here. that the militia was camped out. And really, they intimidated the rioters enough that they got it straightened out. And they got back to work, so the newspapers made a huge deal out of it. We're looking from that Fairport Road bridge again off, and you can just see the edge of the Oxbow here. And this is before the canal was widened with the barge canal expansion. So this is when it's still narrower.
Bill, the original canal though was only 20 feet wide and 5 feet deep.
It varied. It was only about 4 feet wide, 20, 25, 35 feet, yeah, depending on where you were. I mean, narrow.
That looks larger.
Well, there were subsequent enlargements as well. Yeah, there's still more to learn as well. Let's skip that. This home is where that Richard Reed, where the encampment was. Now, I'll bet you know this home. I'll only show it to you because it's this house up on Hulbert. That was the Hulbert house, right up on the bend. Isn't it a beautiful view we have? So imagine it is that house and their orchards in the back that the militia camped way back in 1871. Now, let's talk about some other more fun stuff. Here we are out on the lake. This is Oxbow Lake. Because once they cut this across, it just created this wonderful playground. And people, especially after the barge canal issue was settled and they weren't going to fill it in, people just flocked there. And they could build places on state land, just a little place. Some people lived in Fairport and had a cottage in Fairport. East Rochester folks would have a home, and then they would weekend or vacation at the Oxbow. So this way off the Fairport Road, and as you can see, little places, some of them no bigger than a boathouse, some of them, many of them built with boxcar lumber from East Rochester. We've talked about that before. I'll show you an example. But then there's one big structure here. You see that? One much bigger. Maybe that was for the rich folks at the Oxbow, but I don't think so. It has a unique feature, kind of a big slide. I'll show you what that is in a moment. This is a pond down in Bushnell's Basin. I'm using it because it's a handy photo to show of people harvesting ice. And ponds and the canal were wonderful for harvesting ice to help our community get through the summer months. They put those big blocks of ice away in ice houses, packed away, insulated with straw, and ice would last way into the summer. Horses here to help them drag that ice. Well, 1885, same year as the bird's eye view. Russ Tibbetts, as a carpenter, has been building at the Oxbow for Mr. Pintler an ice house of 30 by 60 feet big, with 14-foot posts to hold 400 to 600 tons? No, 600 tons plus another 400 adjacent to it. Huge blocks of ice that he is building up this industry at the Oxbow. So it made me wonder about this building. Here we are closer to it. Look at that feature that it was described to push those ice blocks up into the building. That's an ice house. And I can show you another ice house too, but this is Steve Shalaba. He's a neighbor of mine. And Steve's father used to do some scuba diving. And Steve brought this out to show me one day. His father found this in the Oxbow, scuba diving. They call this a whiffle tree, but you can imagine that there were two horses attached to this thing, right? It's very possible that they were harvesting ice with these horses at the Oxbow, and this was left there until his dad found it. Some reason it was in the Oxbow. One more thing about ice houses, because you're going to know this building. The large ice house recently constructed by Burlingame Brothers in connection with their canning factory. They go on to talk about this ice house in the village of Fairport, very close to Parker Street. Do you recognize it?
Yeah.
It would be understandable to think that that's a barn. That's an ice house. And it was affiliated with a canning operation next door, right here. You know where the 3 condos are on the north side of Parker Street?
Yes. Yeah.
Right there, it used to be this little brick house and another little house. Here, this brick house was the powerhouse for a canning operation. And so there's the ice house in the background. All related to the Oxbow because that was the biggest place to harvest ice. Frank Beaumont was the first person to die from Fairport Perinton engaged in World War I. He was a kid, got out of high school, and he enlisted, and he died in camp of sickness, like so many did in that area. He was also one of Fairport's very first Boy Scouts. And boy, I think he was a terrific photographer. And he took some pictures at the Oxbow that I'll show you. This one, he's walking down Oxbow Road when it was nothing more than a path, walking down towards the Oxbow from town. Now they might have been on Potter Place before that, because the first incident that I found of Potter Place being referred to when it was first donated for development was to provide a route for people to get to the Oxbow. That's what a big deal the Oxbow was, way back in the late 1800s. All these Boy Scouts saluting on their way down to the Oxbow. This picture, I think, is really a tremendous photograph. All of these kids lined up with watermelon. Every kid, their faces are intent. Look at this gentleman. I just love this photograph by Frank Beaumont. And there they are on the edge of the Oxbow having a snack. Boy Scouts aren't the only ones that went to the Oxbow. Girl Scouts went there too. And very early on, from 1924, this essay by a scout tells of their recent weekend at the Oxbow. Notable is this portion. The girls had retired for the night. Now, mind you, let me set the stage. And this is a picture from a decade or so later, but I know they're Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts would walk to the Oxbow, camp out overnight, spend the night doing all the things they would do, and then just walk back home again. No indication that an adult was involved whatsoever. The girls had retired for the night, and many were dreaming of the camp life at Sodas, when several of the girls were suddenly awakened by the flash of light from an approaching auto. The majority of the girls thought that their boyfriends had come to give them a pleasant surprise. I didn't see that coming. But fate was against them. Now, this is written by one of the girls. Fate was against them. When they realized their mistake, they began to wonder and to be frightened as to whom were the occupants of the car. A most interesting time followed. One of the heavyweights almost fainted from fright, and one of the lightweights nearly sprained her back trying to see the owner of the car. It was just a family who came. They were camping at the Oxbow, and they just arrived. But, oh, the excitement. And, oh, if only it had been the boyfriends. I mentioned boxcar lumber. I have several photos from Bonnie King Trano. Bonnie King Trano provided me these photos a decade ago. And this is a fairly typical circa 1915 Oxbow weekend getaway. Made from boxcar lumber. Do you see the stenciling on the vertical boards? How many of people, anyone have boxcar lumber in their home or their garage? Yeah. Boxcar lumber came from the East Rochester car shops, and it was available to really anyone, and it's all over our community. It is 3/4 inch thick, I believe, southern pine. If you try to drive a nail through it, you might have great difficulty. Great stuff. It lasts forever. So these folks are enjoying their time in their little stay.
Is that Arch Woods back there?
Well, I think, yeah, you can kind of make out where we are, right? I think based upon these slopes, based upon where even the wires are today, that's where they were then.
Almost by your house.
Yeah, I think you're getting close to Hart's Woods up there. Maybe down the hill further.
Or Nettlewood,
Yeah, down
by Nettle Creek.
Nettle Creek, not too far from Old Post probably. I'm not sure what area we're looking at here. Another photo from Bonnie King Trano. But you can see the different ways that people enjoyed having fun in those early decades of the 20th century. Edith Hopp with her father, George Hopp. Now, to try to date this, Edith was born in 1919, so this is the early 20s, and there's a good view. Trying to figure out where we are, I'd say we're on that more the southern swing of the Oxbow, right?
Yeah.
If you've been down there a lot, you kind of get a feel for it. Here's Edith, she's grown up a little bit. And here's Cora Bills, Theo Hop, and George Hop. Look at the big hill up there in the distance of that neighborhood that we spoke to. So just a terrific collection of photos. And in this 1920s photo, it shows us the lake one more time before it started to be filled in a great deal, the result of dredging. New York State dredging the canal, taking the byproduct of the spoils of their dredging and dumping it in the Oxbow. And so after a period of decades, this really became largely filled in. But even look here, you see how there's a little peninsula here and water on this side and this side? There are some spots. Does anyone remember any cottages at the Oxbow or homes where there was water on both sides?
No.
Yeah,
No.
Right?
there was a little wooden bridge that went over it.
To give you access to it, yeah. I have read,
No, it was gone.
with context to fires, that was an especially difficult place to put out a fire. And the entire Oxbow area, fires were the great enemy.
So is this looking from Minerva to land?
We're looking more from, what's
Nettle Creek.
up towards the top of the hill, Nettle Creek, what are some of the other street names up there at the top of the hill?
Crossing.
It only makes sense that the photographer tried to get as high as he could here to catch that view. So, no, Minerva would be more over here.
Power lines are visible, or, oh, right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just before they cross the canal.
Yep,
Old Post Road is to your left.
yeah, Old Post would be over here. Make sense?
When it rained in the spring and flooded out, you couldn't get to the cottages.
If the water got even
Yeah.
extra high. So, the effect of dredging. This photo I know is dated 1946, this one more in the 1950s. You can just begin to see the effect of dredging here, just the very beginnings of what would become islands. This one has grown quite a bit in perhaps just 10 years or more. So you can see how that's filling in, but look at the number of residences that you see. Both part-time residents, full-time residents, year-round, seasonal, all of the above. Now this picture is from the late 60s or early 1970s as it starts to fill in, and then this is just taken just in October, just last month. Now these two are from a different perspective. This one's off to the west, this one's off to the
Towards
east.
school.
Right? Okay, the Oxbow Restaurant. Why are we laughing about the Oxbow Restaurant? Have you seen the menu? This building still stands. This is the last structure at the Oxbow. It's not on the water. It's across the little dirt road from the water. But boy, this place had a story. And you know, the Oxbow, rightfully or wrongly, developed a reputation over many years of time. And like a lot of places, something bad could happen. Maybe it gets blown out of proportion, or maybe it really, really was bad. But that sticks, and it gets in people's minds, and people say, oh, don't you go down there, kids. Don't you go to the Oxbow. When you tell them that, what do? Oh, I'm going to the Oxbow. Fairport man dies following brawl at the inn. It's kind of true. What happened was, this is September of 1947. A resident of the Oxbow and his wife went down to the inn, went to the restaurant, Saturday afternoon, walked in, another gentleman at the bar started paying too much attention to this man's wife. It sounds like you have personal experience. So there's certain choices that the husband has to make in this situation. The choice that he made was to say, forget this, get in a huff, and he left. Oh, and he left his wife there. He came back a few hours later, and the gentleman was still paying too much attention to his wife. I'll use Coach as a prop. He went up and he socked him. Guy fell backwards and died.
Wow. What was his wife doing while
She was a victim. The newspapers played this up. Imagine the talk that went on around the town of this murder at the Oxbow. Gentleman had a heart attack. He had a heart attack and died. But the story lingered for many, many years. And other stories. Remember, I read you the one from the 1871. Boatmen are afraid to go to the Oxbow. So this place still is there. You can walk right past it and you see it's a private home. The Oxbow folks were proud folks. They loved their community and they defended their community. And one of the things that they thought they should do, I think they were very smart, is they created in our local Fairport newspaper a column. They called it the Oxbow Briefs. And back then, there was this thing called local newspapers. And they had columns for every little corner and every little neighborhood in the community. Egypt had their own column, Bushnell's Basin, even the trolley stops back in the early 20th century, there'd be stop 13. And you know, the cluster of people would send in their social media of the day to the newspaper. So this is an example of an Oxbow brief column from 1952. And I've shown you my files. I have dozens and dozens of these. They were wonderful, and you could really learn what was going on in the Oxbow. And they were communicating to each other, but they were also letting the community know that, hey, this is a nice place, and we cherish it, we love it, and we're not squatters. Still, one of the great hazards at the Oxbow was fires, and there were several fires. This photograph is a vivid example of how the close proximity of these little structures to each other was a great danger. When you couple that with, it was almost impossible to fight a fire by traditional means. There were no fire hydrants. By the way, there was also no sewer systems. There was electricity. They had phones, but they had no civilized way to handle sewage. We'll get back to that. So fires were a real risk. And when one place went, sometimes more than one place went. Very dangerous, a difficult situation.
Didn't each one of them have a wellhead that went into the ground to bring some kind of water out?
What I have read is that there were a couple, maybe 3 wells placed here, 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 and you would go for your water and put it in containers. One of the jobs of the kids sometimes that were in the families at the Oxbow. So that's what I've heard. And then to add insult to injury, I told you about the stories or the services that they did not have. They didn't have water service, obviously, and what they did have is wells that were tainted. New York State did come down and test those wells and found out that they really shouldn't be drinking out of those wells. So it made life difficult. Fires, a continuing threat. But still, people were captivated by the Oxbow, people who lived there and people who traveled on the canal. Like the Perinton Historical Society, who took this cruise in 1958. We even have a photograph. And I think this is a really nice picture of the Oxbow. This was taken by that group, the PHS group, in 1958, September. One thing I noticed with this photograph and these residences, most of these are not hanging out over the water. It was pretty typical that these did hang over the water to some degree. So there's a nice view of the Oxbow. I have plenty more to show you. On the other hand, many of them started to deteriorate. This one's falling right into the water over here. Yeah, these folks have a fun motorboat. There's a lot of boating, a lot of fishing at the Oxbow. Some of them were dilapidated and were abandoned, no longer residences. So you might have 2 or 3 nice places and then one that was really melting away. How many people lived at the Oxbow? Well, I took a look at the 1940 census. Keep in mind, when we come up with this number of people, 39 people, first of all, probably not everyone was captured in the census. And secondly, the census captures where you live as your primary residence. So if people were coming down there for weekends or occasionally, or if a place was rented out, it wasn't It wasn't capturing those people. So 39 permanent residents in 1940.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear about the gentleman who lifted weights down at the Oxbow? A hulk of a man, Bruce Christman. There he is. He was one of the last residents at the Oxbow. And I encountered Mr. B.A. Christman. Anybody see my show on the can factory?
Yeah.
This is the basement of the can factory, and he worked there for a while. And this is a beam in the basement. He put his name and date, just about the same date as his photo, 1959, 1958. I've talked to so many people, usually men who were little boys, who just watched him lift those weights and think, wow, I want to be that guy someday.
1,280 pounds.
1,280. He was a championship lifter,
Yes,
right?
he was, yeah. Learned
And
in the prison.
they were all.
Learned in prison?
Yeah.
From what I've read, this does not surprise me so much. What was his brother's name?
Roger.
Roger. Bam. Excellent.
They were all homemade weights, though.
Yeah.
All homemade structures.
Everything was homemade.
That's fun. This is his sister, Rosalind. And this was their home, 42 Oxbow. They're all numbered. This gentleman I was introduced to by my legendary barber, Roger Masangelo, who I try to bring up in every talk. Terrific fellow. Roger told me about this gentleman, and I called him in California. He's since passed away. Roger told me that he graduated with Roger. He was probably the smartest kid in class, in his graduating class, valedictorian, but said, I'm not going to college. I'm going out to Hollywood. I'm going to be a movie star. And he was in movies. But maybe what he's most remembered for is being about the original What's in Your Wallet? Back when they had these menacing Vikings in their What's in Your Wallet. And so I wrote about Dave Adams in one of my columns. Dave Adams?
He's famous.
He's famous. Dave Adams was born in 1941. Permit me to do this. And he came to the Oxbow as a young boy with his widowed mother a few years later. Desperate for a place to live, friends helped them to transform a small shed built from boxcar lumber into a home. That's where they lived, right there. He remembers always being cold in the winter. With no insulation, the wind penetrated the walls and floor, and a tiny stove struggled to keep them warm. Both Dave and the Gleasons recall pumping water from a well a good distance away from their cottages. In the winter months, they used a sled to pull the heavy jugs back home through the snow. That is when the pump wasn't frozen. Talking about that newspaper column that they had, 18 families were listed in this one issue, including a guy by the name of Bill Gleason. Does anybody remember Bill? Bill Gleason, he lived on South Avenue when I got to know him, but he grew up at the Oxbow. And I went to his house, he kindly invited me, and he told me about growing up on the Oxbow. And what an interesting guy. And it led to two stories I want to show you. One involved a rowboat. When he was a kid at the Oxbow, he and a buddy, they loved to go fishing. And they would take an old wooden rowboat out, row it out into the lake. The islands were just starting to form out there from dredging, but there was plenty of areas to fish. And they would go out there and fish and fish and fish. But then he heard, somebody told him that the best fish to eat are the ones that you cook as quickly as possible after you've caught them. So they realized all they needed to do was take some firewood out in the rowboat, start a fire, catch them and cook them, catch them and cook them. It worked well for a short period of time. They patched up the boat, and then they found an even better opportunity when they found out that their neighbor had a new outboard motor. No more rowing. So they waited until their neighbor went off to work one morning at Eastman Kodak Company, and they snuck over, and they used the same wooden rowboat that they had, but they put the outboard motor on it. And man, they were the kings of the lake. They went out there to fish and they were motoring around, having a great time until thump. The motor fell off the back of the boat. Went right down into the lake. They spent the next hour and a half diving into Oxbow Lake until finally they found the outboard, tied a rope to it, and pulled it back up, used their arms to get back to shore, took it out of the boat, put it back in the shed, and never said a word. Now, when Bill Gleason told me this, he was overcome with sadness. He really was. And he said, I've regretted that my entire life. And I said, Bill, you know, speaking from personal experience, if that's the worst thing you've ever done, I think you're doing okay. Wonderful guy. These are photographs provided to me by Debbie Wyman. She and her mom and brothers moved down to the Oxbow, and they were there in the 1960s. So that's when these images, and the fishing stories continue. There's a nice bass right there. And you can see the difference. Here's a photo when the water is full, the canal's full for the season, and when the canal was drained, they had a little splash, and he's still catching fish, even though there's only 2 or 3 feet of water back there. But you can see the difference. There's those, you can always tell where you are. You see those towers, and you know we're looking off towards the south, right? If you know the Oxbow. Here's another image provided by Debbie Wyman, just looking really the other direction where we start to look around the bend. So I would say this is probably the hill up here around Hulbert. That's my guess. Yes.
So you and I talked about something I heard a long time ago, that the structures had to be built 80% over the water in order to obtain some kind of tax advantage.
You told me that.
Yes.
I have not verified that. So the previous historian taught me on my first day of training that if you don't know something for sure, say something like, "It has been said." Some believe. Once I confirm that, I'll say, I talked to a guy, man, he knew his stuff because he told me, and he was right, so I'm working on that. I don't know about that percentage. It might be true. Anyone remember this lady? The last resident, Florence Rutter, the last resident at the Oxbow, the last waterfront resident. And she passed away in 2012, but she lived there for about 60 years or so. Miss Rutter's cottage is as attractive as any its size on Canandaigua Lake or the St. Lawrence River. And her pleasant Oxbow home refutes the unsavory legends because there were so many. It must have been exhausting to fight off these stories of where you live is a terrible place. These people loved to live here. This was her home. She lived from 1925 to 2012. I've talked to many people that knew her, people she babysat for, people she worked at the greenhouses up at the corner of Hulbert, Hart's Greenhouses. So many, she bartended, kept a club behind the bar, because you never know. She was featured in a Democrat and Chronicle story. Here is her house, a more recent picture that I took. I think I took that. Very nice and tidy little home.
Where was the restaurant?
Pardon?
Where was the restaurant? That's not where the restaurant is.
No, the restaurant, the inn, if you go in from the Old Orchard neighborhood, and some of you know how to get to it from there, you know the Old Orchard neighborhood. So off at Hulbert, you go down that street, you get down to about the bottom of the hill, there's a big house with like a driveway there between 2 houses. You don't drive in there. You walk in there, and paying great respect to that private property you're walking through, and you get down to the Oxbow that way. So when you do that, you immediately encounter the inn. That's where it is as you get down there. Then you take a hard right. This is her house in 2013, Florence Rutter's. The fate of many of these last homes was they were destroyed by arson not long after. It has been said that New York State was more than happy to see them burn rather than having to come and take them down. What I've neglected to say is in later years, the state was not allowing people to pass on these properties that they owned on state leased land because of the lack of sewer facilities, because of all the difficulties, water problems, and so one by one, they were no longer occupied. And in later years especially, arson took the toll of many of them, and this was the last home. The Oxbow residents in 1962 made a real strong drive to try to get a special sewer district in their community. Had they done that, it would probably still be a community today, in my view. It failed. I'm going to show you a few more homes. Many of these photographs were taken in 1960, and they're from the town's assessor's department. We had I don't quite remember, I wasn't there, but there was an effort to take a picture of everything in the town in 1960 that existed. So here's a few Oxbow homes, just different ones. This one would be 4 Oxbow Road. You can see they vary greatly. The one thing they probably all have in common is that they were enlarged over time. Still small though. So you get the idea of the variety that we see here. Love the dog in the car, right? You see the water in the distance, another and another. So that while you have a nice tidy place here and here, you see one in 1960 that is no longer inhabited. It's on its last legs. Now, just recently, a teacher from Brooks Hill School contacted us with a photo album they found in a closet with hundreds of photographs that I have digitized. A couple of them were of the Oxbow. Here's one when the water is down, another one when the water is down. So it's fun that we're still growing our libraries, our inventory of images of our community. I mentioned Joyce Rumpf at the beginning. An album that she created, a school college project in 1977, included a visit to the Oxbow. And she just took some wonderful pictures of the Oxbow, showing life there. I mean, the little cottage, but then the picnic tables and the grill. Before I read all the text in it, I studied this sign closely and realized, oh, that's from the 1977 fair that was held. Well, then I looked at the cover of the binder, and it said 1977. So there you go. More pictures on the water. Doesn't it look like a peaceful place?
Bill, they were all issued license plates from the state.
Yes. Well, the point was they're issued little license plates from the state, and properties that are on the canal today still are. If you live on Old Post Road, my wife and I lived on Red Barn Circle on the canal, 2 examples. Roselawn Avenue is another one, there's others. If you choose to lease that canal front portion of the land, the state land, adjoining your yard, you pay your $100 or whatever it is, probably more, a little bit more today, and you're issued a plate that you put out there on your deck, you know, where it can be seen. Yeah. More photos by Joyce Rumpf showing the variety of living and showing that people had gardens and people had tree houses. It was a community, it was a home, and people loved it there. I've heard people say that they really valued their privacy because, you know, it was also a place that people wanted to come and explore, sometimes without the best of intentions. This is a telling photograph of the mailboxes in 1977 for just how many people were there receiving mail. These are recent photographs that I just took in August. So the Oxbow today, I love to go there. It is a peaceful, quiet, serene place. It is about nature now. It is in great proximity to Hart's Woods, which is the shortest walk, and is a wonderful old-growth forest. And so these are 2 places. In fact, I took about 200 people there over 2 days, I think, last year or the year before, on a walk. It's a wonderful place to go. Here's some images that I just took in October. So we're looking out, that's the canal bank in the distance, somebody's riding a bike, and this is the edge of one island and the edge of another island. We're looking between the 2 islands. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
dredging spoils came from mostly the port of Fairport?
I don't know the east and west distance from which they brought their spoils, but they had limited places to go with it, I would suspect. I would like to show you, and I think this is it. This is just a brief film created by Scott Diamond, our communications guru for the town of Perinton. Thanks for putting that together, Scott. If you go to the Oxbow, be aware that there are a lot of people that have worked hard to make it the beautiful natural retreat that it is today. There are neighbors, there are people that love to walk their dogs there. There are scouts and their families that have worked hard to clear invasive species and do other beneficial things, build benches. And so, in addition, the town has really got more active in cutting away the grass in a pretty wide swath, which also helps to keep those invasive species down and makes it more usable as well. So, if you haven't taken the opportunity recently, it'd be nice in the winter too. Yes.
There are a lot, oh, I shouldn't say a lot, but we live on Old Post, and we so many times have seen bald eagles coming through, and love that area in the Oxbow.
In addition to every reason why it's so great, bald eagle. Yeah. Isn't that nice?
Where did they put sewage? You said they had no sewage.
So the question is about sewage, and what the heck did they do with sewage? Well, I've heard a number of stories. I talked about pictures from Debbie Wyman. She told me that one of their childhood duties in the 60s, thank you, they would have a big bucket underneath the toilet, underneath the floor of their home, and the kids regularly would have to crawl under there, get it, walk it down the dirt trail to the big holding tank and dump it. That was one means. Some people went to chemical toilets. Some people did what the Wymans did, but didn't use a bucket, which meant everything just went down, which is a pretty bad solution.
Before they did that, were they dumping the sewage in the canal, or?
I think there was a lot of that going on. And if you go back far enough, talking about were they just dumping the sewage in the canal, You notice we just had the bridge replaced at Thomas Creek on North Main Street?
Yeah.
When they did that work, I was down there constantly photographing and looking at what they were finding. There were pipes that were uncovered that were going into Thomas Creek. Well, some of those pipes were sewage pipes. Because when Fairport first got sewage systems, the solution early on, before there was any overreaching method to get rid of it, on the north side of the village, sewage from homes went to Thomas Creek. On the south side of the village, sewage from homes went to the Erie Canal. And that's where sewage went.
So they were polluting the canal.
Oh, it smelled in the 60s. It smelled. That's why. In Bushnell's Basin, it reeked of sewage.
Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here. I will be doing it again. If you know folks that missed it, I'll do it at the community center sometime. Be safe on the steps on your way out. Great to see you all. I'm honored to have you.